If you're watching this video and you haven't watched part one, here's part one. We realized that we needed to probably split them up. I was going to release this video while I was in the Bahamas for work. Actually, broadcasting some games here. If you haven't seen part one, probably go do that now. It's got like 3 of the 5 continents that you want to pay attention to. If you don't care, then cool. Be reckless and dangerous if you don't. South America had already gotten underway when we started talking about this before, but things are going really according to plan at the top. Brazil and Argentina are through. Neither team has lost. They went out and drew each other in the most recent match they both played. And even though both nations still have 5 matches left to play in World Cup qualifying, there has been no drama left up to the breeze about Brazil and Argentina making it. The surprise package is Ecuador. See, the qualifying's already started. It's a third of the way through, and Ecuador has won half of its games. This is a team that didn't make the World Cup 4 years ago and wasn't too close. So we'd obviously pointed out that Ecuador is doing well at the time. They've managed to miraculously extend that. In the most recent qualifying window, they got wins over Venezuela and Chile without dropping a freaking game. Ecuador is remarkably close to clinching qualification with just 4 matches left to go. They were slipping. They were only at 17 points before those 2 wins. But as somebody's pointed out, in South American qualifying, you are always 1 or 2 wins away from turning things around. Because right now, Ecuador has won exactly half of its games and is very clearly 3rd out of 10 in the group. But once you get below Ecuador, who looks like with a 6-point cushion, a good goal difference cushion, and only 4 matches left, it looks like Ecuador is going to be in. Then there's 1 more automatic spot and a playoff spot left to play for. And within 2 points of that are Colombia, Peru, Chile, Uruguay, and Bolivia? Is that right? Are we okay? Paraguay was actually pretty close to that, but they've done nothing but lose. They've lost 3 of their last 4 matches. They've not won in 5 matches in qualifying, and so Paraguay's gone tumbling out of the situation. But as you can imagine, when the points are this close, every match is just ridiculously important, which makes the fact that Bolivia went out and beat Uruguay 3-0 that much more insane. You look at Paraguay's form, and then you look at what Bolivia's done. They started their qualifying in very Bolivian fashion. They drew Colombia, sure. They lost to Argentina. They lost to Uruguay. They lost to Argentina again. They lose to Ecuador by 3 goals. And then all of a sudden, they beat Peru. And then all of a sudden, they play spiraling Paraguay. And they beat them. And then they just happen upon Uruguay again. And this time they beat them. 3 wins in their last 4 qualifying matches have taken Bolivia from, well, you can do the math, 6 points to 15. If you look at the form table of all the teams that are competing for those last 1.5 spots, Peru and Chile also have 3 wins from 5, but that's it. Uruguay's lost 4 straight matches, and they are in an absolute death spiral. Things are just getting weird. I'm really terrified to even try and make a prediction about what's going to happen. Colombia's drawn 4 of its last 5 matches to pull back to the pack. They have 8 draws in 14 matches. If you have any idea who's going to end up in that 4th qualifying spot, you should probably let me know, or somebody know, because you'll make a lot of money. 1 win from any of these teams is going to make a massive difference. And South American qualifying is as interesting as it's ever been. There is 1 team that is completely out of it, and that's Venezuela. They have removed themselves from the equation by losing 3 consecutive matches. But there is a match that I can actually point out to you to circle, because to begin our list, Bolivia beating Uruguay 3-0 is the most insane match that has happened so far in South America. But Colombia plays Peru on January 27th. Colombia, who has drawn basically every match they've played since the beginning of time, but they're managing to not lose. They haven't won since the beginning of September. They've slowly slid back to the pack, and now they're right next to Peru, who's in form. That game in January, if one of those 2 teams can win, will make that team incredibly comfortable. Colombia has a pretty easy run-in too against Bolivia, which might not be, in Venezuela after playing Argentina. That's about as easy as it can get in South America. So if Colombia can win that match, they're going to get the final qualifying spot. And that is why this January 27th match against a Peruvian team that is resurgent and reborn is very important. But to be honest, there are a ton of matches between all these teams in this big jumbled pile that will determine who actually gets that spot. Because if Chile, Uruguay, Peru, Colombia, Bolivia, or Paraguay reel off 3 wins in their last 4 matches, it's likely they're at least going to be in the playoffs. playoff. And let's be honest, all of those teams, except probably Bolivia, definitely has that in their wheelhouse. The surprising team that could still qualify, though, you already know. You know what I'm gonna say. Bolivia! 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 Huh, huh, Bolivia, Bolivia. Huh, huh. This brings us to the final group. You've probably not heard of this continent, very obscure. It's called Europe. And the European groups are done. The European qualifying is not done. There is a playoff system that is rather elaborate, and I will be explaining in some detail. But much like Africa, Europe creates an environment with a bunch of groups and a bunch of drama all happening at the same time, and it's freaking awesome. So here's what happened. In Group A, we had Serbia and Portugal and Ireland and Luxembourg and Azerbaijan. And as you might notice by looking at it, Serbia's automatically qualified for the World Cup. They're there. They join Argentina and Brazil as teams that are going to Qatar. We know for absolute certain a team that missed the Euros is now going to the World Cup. How did they do it? Well, they scored a goal against Portugal, because just like Africa, these teams they play on the last day. When it's important, they play each other. Serbia and Portugal played each other on the last day. Portugal needed to win. And would you just look at that? Serbia won. And this means Ronaldo is actually up against it to try and make it to the World Cup. And this is not the only major footballing nation out of Europe that is in real danger. Not only do you have Chile and Uruguay teams that you consider regulars at a World Cup that are in serious danger of not going, and Colombia as well, and a team like Ivory Coast that's a regular presence at the World Cup that is now already guaranteed to not be there. You've got Portugal that is headed to a playoff that I imagine we're just going to explain it now. Ready? Here we go. If you finish second in your World Cup qualifying group, well, congratulations, you're going to the playoff for certain. But those are not the only teams that are headed to this playoff. You also can qualify for the playoff by having won your Nations League group. So here's another reason to really pay attention to the Nations League. If you are one of the two best, highest ranked Nations League winners, then you also get a route to the playoff, even if you didn't finish in your top two of the actual qualifying group. So what happens is Portugal goes into a pot with a bunch of other teams. If you were in a group that had to play against 5 other teams, then your results against the worst team in that group are removed. They're thrown out, and that creates a table where everybody has only played 8 matches, because like half of European groups only have 5 teams and half only have 6. And so if you're in one of the groups with 6, you drop the San Marino results, and then you get a table where everybody has 8 matches. If you are in the top 6 of that table, you're a seeded team. Are you still with me? If you're in the bottom 4, you go into the unseeded pot. This means you are not going to host your first playoff game. The other 2 teams that make up the unseeded pot are obviously the teams that didn't finish top 2 in their group but won their Nations League groups, which, just for intents and purposes, just knowing who those teams are, it's Austria and Czechia, 2 teams that won their Nations League B groups. There was one team that won their Nations League B group but is not going, and that would be Hungary, who is literally ranked 1 behind Czechia, and that's the reason they don't still have a chance to go to the World Cup. Rather savage, but it is a system that makes sense. The other Nations League group winners that can't go: Slovenia, Montenegro, Albania, Armenia, Gibraltar, and Faroe Islands. They were a little far away. But it's not just a straight you win your match and you're in system. What is actually going on is Europe only has 3 spots left, and there are 12 teams. And so there are a couple of draws that will happen. One, if you're a seeded team, you will draw your unseeded team, and then you will have to play that team at home. You're the seeded team, so you get to host the game. You will also be drawn against another tie. So you're going to say it's Portugal draws Austria, right? And then Portugal and Austria are playing, but then Czechia and whoever they're playing is the other part of that pot. And then the 2 winners of those games will play each other. And then the winner of that goes to the World Cup. So what I'm praying for is Portugal ends up playing the other giant that actually missed out on World Cup qualifying in order to go to the World Cup. That is possible, and it's hilarious that that's possible. As for the match formats, you play 1 match each. These aren't home and aways. It is 1 match between the seeded and unseeded team, and then you play 1 match between the winners of those 2 games that got drawn against each other to play to go to the World Cup. All the drama you could possibly want. The host nation of that final match will literally be drawn at random. because you don't know if it's a seeded or unseeded team that's getting there. And so they will draw the host at random for those final matches, which controversy, of course. But that's the complete system. So there are 3 spots for what are eventually 12 teams. Austria and Czechia have grabbed the last 2 spots as Nation League group winners. Portugal has grabbed a seeded spot. They ended up being at the top of the table for all second place finishing teams, so they have a very seeded spot in the World Cup draw. There, see, it's simple. You understand. In Group B, we actually had a very similar situation, except this was Sweden's to lose. Greece removed itself from the equation with a couple of losses and a draw down the stretch. They couldn't make it interesting. But you know who emerged from the equation was our lovely friends in Georgia, because Sweden had 15 points and was sailing. They were actually ahead of Spain. If they won against Georgia, then all they would need was a win or a draw against Spain in the final match, and they were going to be good. The issue is that Georgia has a guy named Kvisha Kvaratskhelia, who for a few years has been touted as a wonder kid. Turns out that is not overhyped. He scored 2 goals. Sweden lost to Georgia, went into the match against Spain needing to win, and Spain produced, as it seems to always do in a match that it really needs to get into the World Cup these days, a win. And Spain clinched the top of the group, 4 points clear of a Sweden that brought back the carcass of Zlatan Ibrahimovic, if carcass actually means somebody that's still pretty darn good. A bitter pill to swallow for Sweden, but at least Sweden is a seeded team for the draw, so they should theoretically get an easier match going in to the next round. Shout out to Spain for just pulling out 4 consecutive wins against every other team in their group in the second round of qualifying. They had 2 wins, a draw, and a loss after the first round, and then just won 4 straight and ran away with it. In Group C, we had Switzerland and Italy, and I say this all the time because it is not something that should be taken for granted. Switzerland did not used to be this good of a national team. They make World Cup knockout stages. They get to the Euro quarterfinals, right? Like, this is a Swiss national team that for the last, as long as I've been paying attention, the last 10, 15 years has been remarkably consistent. They've got a small population, a domestic league that can be accurately described as meh, and yet they put together results on an industrial scale. You put them in a World Cup qualifying group with thirsty Northern Ireland and Bulgaria, 2 teams that would have sneakily backed themselves to contend for a second spot, and an Italian team coming off a European championship, and Italy shot itself in the foot here, but Switzerland didn't lose. It won 5 matches, drew 3, won its final match going away against Bulgaria 4-0, which forced Italy to have to win, and Italy drew its final match against Northern Ireland in Belfast. Case closed. The Italians are going to the playoff. Yes, of course, the Italians are seeded in the playoffs, so they are going to ideally get an easier draw, but you could end up having to play Portugal to get into a World Cup if you're Italy, all because you couldn't beat Northern Ireland by a couple of goals. Now, I have a lot of respect for Northern Ireland. They finished ahead of Bulgaria. They've made it to the Euros in my memory, but they're not a team that should be able to hang with Italy. The Italians only won 1 of their last 5 matches, and that was against Lithuania. They completely choked this, but Switzerland deserves credit. Nobody can take anything away from you if you don't freaking lose a game. They won 3 of their last 4. They managed to beat Northern Ireland, Lithuania, and Bulgaria while drawing Italy in their second to last match. Shout out to Jorginho, who everybody says is a brilliant penalty taker, yet managed to have a very important penalty saved very late on against Switzerland in this 1-1 draw in Rome. The Swiss did everything they had to do, and they are going to the World Cup with Serbia, with Spain, Argentina, and Brazil. It really is remarkable coming down to that last day because Switzerland's goal difference was freaking better too. Italy needed to win by multiple goals against Northern Ireland because Switzerland put so many goals up on Bulgaria. That's winning with authority. They earned it. This brings us to Group D, which produced probably one of the weirdest spectacles I've ever seen. Finland was on 11 points going into the final day. They had battled and battled the team that had captured hearts at the Euros. The Euros debutante, that always governs the story, right? Against the Ukrainian team that made the Euro quarterfinals. Bosnia and Herzegovina was a team that was in the top level of the Nations League. They actually just got relegated from it, but obviously a team with quality. It's a tough group. France breezed it. They ended up qualifying before the final day. Congratulations to them. They won their last 3 matches and did it in style. But it's the last match that draws the most attention because it was France against Finland. Ukraine was 2 points behind, and it only won 1 match in all of qualifying, and it was unfortunately for Finland against Finland. And I really mean that. Ukraine had only won 1 match in all of qualifying. And this is the bizarre thing that I'm referring to. Here's your first batch of World Cup qualifying matches, a draw with France, Finland, and Kazakhstan. That's a pretty bipolar week. Then we had all the Euros nonsense, all good fun. You lose to England, you come back and you draw Kazakhstan again. But then 3 days later, you draw France. Again, even in the friendly, they go out and draw Czechia in a friendly. They finally show up and manage to beat Finland, but then they draw Bosnia and they draw Bulgaria in a friendly. Not the same, like they can't stop. Final match comes up and they play against Bosnia and Herzegovina, and Ukraine needed to win and they needed Finland to not beat France. You can pretty safely say Finland wasn't going to beat France, but it took until the 59th minute for Oleg Zinchenko to score the most important goal for Ukraine in at least a few months. Dovbyk polished it off in the 79th minute, and Ukraine was able to get the win. Finland was also level at 0 with France at halftime, but unfortunately the French decided to actually play and did wipe Finland away at the end of the day. Finland showed a lot of heart getting itself into that situation, but Ukraine's ability to not lose or win actually ended up saving it. They advance to the playoff as an unseeded team, surprisingly, but as an unbeaten team in World Cup qualifying, which includes conceding multiple goals to Kazakhstan. Riddle me that one. Then we get to Group E. This is the final group that only has 5 teams in it, and it was won by Belgium. Going away, they had it clinched before the final day. They didn't lose a match. You know, they did play on the final day? Wales. And Wales is cooking. The Welsh didn't need the fact that they won their Nations League group to help get them into a World Cup. They got themselves into the playoff all by their lonesome. And not only did they do that, Wales was the final team to end up above the seeded line, along with Sweden, Italy, Portugal. You haven't, really met a lot of the unseeded teams. You've only met Ukraine so far. But the Welsh are actually going to be a seeded team for the draw in the European playoff. They were trying to get that seeded spot instead of the unseeded spot because Czechia was behind them. And as you might remember, Czechia was a team that had won their Nations League group and was in line to make it regardless. They went out on the final day and beat Estonia. This is after going out and beating Belarus and doing a good job to put some pressure on Wales towards the end. But the Welsh the Welsh only lost 1 match in all of qualifying, and that match was to Belgium in the opening qualifying match of the entire thing. They have not lost a qualifier since. And so here comes Wales, a team that's just reemerged on the scene with consecutive Euros appearances after being adrift at sea in the international scene for like 50 years, is now 2 matches away from the World Cup. They drew Belgium on the last day to make sure they got the seeded spot. They needed the goal or else it wasn't going to be seeded. But sure as all heck, here comes Wales, one of their nameless Moors, scoring the goal to send them there. It was Kiefer, actually, that big center forward that bothered everybody at the Euros with a big head wrap. Wales was never in danger of actually not qualifying, though, because Wales also won that Nations League group, like I said, which means if Czechia ended up above them, then Wales just would have been an unseeded team, and Czechia would have actually still been an unseeded team, so they were playing for absolutely nothing. They still won. Now to Group F, where we get to the groups where you had that extra bad team in there just for your own fun. It was Denmark, Scotland, Israel, Austria, Faroe Islands, Moldova. Faroe Islands, Moldova, see you later. Israel gave it a really good college try, but it's kind of hard to catch Scotland when they've won 6 matches in a row. The Danes clinched World Cup qualification really early, and they'd done it by winning their first 9 matches in the league, but they ran into a Scottish buzzsaw at Hampden Park that went out and beat them 2-0. Scotland, just like Wales, has not been at a World Cup in a long time. It's been longer for Wales, but Scotland's been adrift in the international scene for quite a while. And after their loss to Denmark, in the 1st of September, like right when the last video I made came out, the whole guide of everything, Scotland has just cranked out non-stop wins since. They've won every match. Israel's a tough match. They went out and they beat Austria. They got a couple of matches against Moldova and the Faroe Islands in there just to make you feel better about yourself. And then they went and beat the untouched Danes, the best qualifying team in Europe for this qualifying cycle. They went out and beat them fair and square in Hampden Park, 2-0. This means that Scotland is seeded for the playoff draw. That means Scotland is one of the favorites to get out of the playoff draw, and in that type of form, you have to imagine they would be. Austria continues to disappoint in World Cup qualifying. They actually finished behind Israel on goals for. They finished 4th, but because they won their Nations League group, Austria, perhaps deservingly in quality, and because they did earn it in the Nations League, will be an unseeded team in the draw. This all weirdness brings us to Group G, where things would get as weird as possible because it was the only group where all three teams at the top could simultaneously make it and not make it to the World Cup completely. It was the Netherlands, Turkey, and Norway in a three-way dance that was really kind of complicated to keep track of. Fortunately for us, we followed the African model of Netherlands and Norway literally playing each other on the last day. Turkey got the reprieve of playing against Montenegro, and the Turks had to win a couple games to put themselves in this position. They won against Gibraltar, they won against Latvia, and they went out and drew against Norway before that. So they took care of business. They got the wins that they needed. And we were sitting with two teams on 18 points and the Netherlands on 20 points, which means, look, if Norway wins and Turkey wins, then all of a sudden the Netherlands is missing the World Cup again, right? If Norway is able to win or draw and Turkey's not able to get a good result playing against Montenegro, a Montenegrin team that's perfectly solid, that has produced some good results throughout the course of qualifying. I mean, shoot, the match before this, they went out and drew the Netherlands 2-2. Like, this is not a Montenegro team you can go out and just go, all right, yeah, we're going to beat them. But I'll be darned if Turkey didn't show up and actually do it. They went out and they scored 2 goals after going behind. And then you can't even imagine the pressure. Turkey's like the Mexican national team, in my opinion, when I think about it, where the media pressure is so ridiculously intense, the expectations are so ridiculously intense that it's actually just hard to perform for the team. Well, Turkey goes down to Montenegro, which means they are really screwed. If Norway gets any point against the Netherlands, then Turkey is out, but they pull it back over time, over the next 56 minutes, find not only the equalizer, but the goal to take them in front. And while that was happening, the Netherlands was starting to put together its result. An 84th minute goal by Steven Bergwijn buried Norway, a Norway that was playing without its star Erling Haaland, who will miss another major international tournament, which I consider just a rip-roaring shame. This is a Norwegian generation that also includes Odegaard and Christopher Ayer, who I consider to be very good players, and I really hope that they're able to get it turned around and get themselves into a major tournament, because they have yet again missed. The Turks, with the win, end up just 2 points behind the Netherlands, and even when you remove the 6 points from their wins against Gibraltar, Turkey is not a seeded team. I gotcha. Turkey's actually the best unseeded team, which is unlucky for them. But it came down to goal difference against the teams, and they gave up 16 goals they gave up 16 goals in 8 matches. I mean, it's like, that is 5 more than anybody else that ended up in the second place team table. But you know what? They're in there with a chance, and they are gonna give it their absolute all. Or burn down a stadium trying. I'm not kidding, the fans actually do that. Group H had Croatia and Russia. We stick to the classic African style, the way this shook out the whole time. Slovakia and Slovenia beating each other up, but neither showing enough quality to really push forward, even though the Slovakian team had turned in a really good Euros performance. It wasn't enough to jolt them forward. They finish ahead of Slovenia on goal difference. Russia and Croatia went into the last game. Russia on 22 points and Croatia on 20. The Croatian national team, I mean, I said they were a flash in the pan on Twitter. I didn't actually say they were a flash in the pan, but I said they're definitely not now. I mean, their generation is largely aged out. Luka Modric looks more and more like a Ukrainian grandmother by the day, but at 36, he's still able to lead his boys to 4 wins and 5 and top the group by beating Russia on the final day. Now, I will say, if you go down to whether this was deserved or not, Kuderyashov, the ball skips off what is essentially a pond in front of him while he's facing his own goal. It hits him. It's an own goal. Croatia wins 1-0 on an own goal. It was an ugly own goal in the 81st minute. It's a terrible way to not clinch qualification to the World Cup, and now Russia has to go through the meat grinder of that playoff that I talked about. But Croatia is headed to the World Cup, and you just can't imagine much more drama than this. You come down to the last day, and it's a freaking own goal that makes it 1-0. Croatia's going, and full credit to them. And qualifying out of Europe is the hardest. It's still the hardest, and Croatia has managed to make it work. This is remarkably, though, the first time that Croatia has qualified directly. But watch out if Croatia gets out of the group stage. They've done it twice, and they finished 3rd and 2nd, which means, oh my God. In Group I, England won it going away. There was very little drama on the final day because even though Poland lost to Hungary, the Hungarians were still too far away to get there. And unfortunately for them, the situation had already fallen down that they were not going to be able to qualify through the Nations League. Albania had a chance with 3 matches to go to finish 2nd in this group. Absolutely. They'd won a couple on the spin, including a win against Hungary. And then Poland, when it absolutely needed it, turned in a 1-0 victory thanks to Swiderski in the 77th minute. That win catapulted Poland, along with a win after it, and then eventually losing to Hungary on the final day into the second position, where they were going to be able to contend for a spot at the World Cup, and Robert Lewandowski, what I would assume is his swan song. But this Albanian team, very stubborn, and Hungary, despite capturing the imagination, to abuse the phrase, at the Euros, just wasn't really a factor here. They removed themselves from the equation early. That's what you really have to avoid. I mean, they lost to England convincingly. They went out and they lost to Albania. They went out and lost to Albania again. Like, you just can't, if you want to try and catch a team, losing to them twice is probably not the best strategy. Russia entered as a seeded team, by the way, and Poland enters as an unseeded team, but the unseeded team with the best goal difference of any of the unseeded teams. So, I mean, Lewandowski's there. They're dangerous. The final group saw Germany rip through with 9 wins from 10, and they ended emphatically with a win against Armenia on the final day, an Armenian team that at the time of our guide I was pretty high on, and I don't believe they won a match after I said that. Iceland seems to be returning to the depths from whence they came and rose up to the top 20 in the world rankings. They only put together 9 points in qualifying with just 2 wins from 10. Granted, they had a lot of heartbreak, but this was generally open and up for grabs. And North Macedonia's jumped through the hoop here. I mean, they've come in and finished in the last spot. They beat Iceland on the last day, which means even though Romania won against Liechtenstein, it didn't matter because North Macedonia won their final match. They won 3 of their last 5 matches and powered themselves right into second position. They're unseeded, but who cares? North Macedonia was entirely irrelevant 10 years ago when it came to national team play. They were called the former Yugoslav Republic of Macedonia at that time. Now they're blowing it up at the Euros, scoring a bunch of goals. They don't even have Pandev anymore, and they're going to World Cup qualifying. Well, the playoff anyways. They were already, you know. And it's with that in mind that North Macedonia becomes the most surprising team that still has a chance to qualify. They could legitimately qualify through Europe. They're an unseeded team. It's going to be a minefield road. But hey, if you draw somebody like maybe a Wales or a Scotland or a Sweden who seems to be on a downward spiral, and you're able to win that match, you never know what's going to happen in the final match. It's a one-off game. If you have a good game plan and you play with the right heart and you get the right bounce of the ball, it's possible. And North Macedonia is in there with a chance. But yeah, of course they're unseeded. The match to watch, though, just watch the draw. The draw is on the 26th at 11 a.m. They're actually doing it in Zurich for some reason, just to be fancy. And then we will find out what the path is for all 12 of these teams to grab one of the remaining 3 qualifying spots. There are obviously a ton of matches, but to pick my favorite, I'm going Georgia over Sweden. To watch an FM wonder kid just explode on the scene with a couple of goals like that is just mwah. It's beautiful. It's been an incredibly long journey. There are teams now that have cinched their spot in World Cup qualifying. The next window to play some matches is in January. Not on every continent, but soon. And after all the rest of this goes down in March, you can bet your bottom dollar I'll be sitting in this chair again, telling you about all the crazy things that have happened and how Bolivia somehow ended up at the World Cup. I'll see you there. And if you got this far, if you could hit the subscribe button so that you can catch that next video. All right. You got it. Okay.